what were you thinking? Or, she looks smart tonight. How sophisticated. That's an interesting job, but why is it watched by so many viewers? Because we like to sit and agree or disagree. No, that's a great dress. What are they saying? Or, yeah, that guy does look like a penguin on acid, We all have our things that we want to say. And think about it. We love to sit and critique other people. And unfortunately, that same aspect of culture creeps into the church all the time. And I know this because I have the position of speaking in front of people. And I'll just say right off the bat, I'm thankful for that. I enjoy doing it. I enjoy being a pastor. I enjoy being a pastor of this church and working with all of you. I love it. I feel like I get to hang out with family. I mean, literally, because a lot of you are my family. But I get to hang out with family and friends every week. We get to grow together. We get to learn together. It's a great time. But standing here definitely puts me at this awkward advantage or disadvantage of being critiqued. And because afterwards, several of you will say, you did a great job. And on some days, some of you just walk by and say, how's it going, Sean? And I know on those days, maybe not so great a job. And so I have to go home and ask my wife, so am I pretty good? And I'm just kidding. But really, I'm at this place where we learn and grow together, but also, I've been critiqued before. Have any of you ever been critiqued? Done something and had somebody tell you, how does it feel? Terrible. Now, if you ask somebody to watch you and learn, and will you critique me or will you help me, that's one thing. When somebody just comes up with unwarranted criticism, and they say, this is what you should do, or you should do this like me, or you really shouldn't do this, it really just drags you down, doesn't it? And there's nothing, especially when you're trying hard and the person is doing nothing. The hardest thing about watching American Idol is those poor souls, whether they're gifted or not, are standing on stage giving it their best. They're at least singing. They're doing something. And the people sitting judging them are doing nothing. They're just watching. And that's what I want to talk about today is, we need to kind of kick that culture out of our Christian faith, that we would never stand watching somebody else work their heart out to serve, to do what they can for God, to grow, and stand there watching them. Oh, they're not very good. We're doing nothing. So we're going to look at some scriptures that will hopefully help us. And I always find if I can laugh at myself, then I relax a little bit, and then God comes in and says, now while you're laughing, this is true, right? Yes, it's true, Lord. And since you and me know that it's true, I can help you change. Yes, God. Well, then let's go, Sean. So I encourage you today, we'll laugh when we always do. And as we do, just be open to God while we laugh, saying, this is true, isn't it? Because God has this great way of pointing things out in our lives individually that I could never do for you, because that's not my job. But God's very good at that. And He's very, very, sometimes comforting, sometimes challenging, but He's always accurate. So let's open up to John 21 today. John 21. This passage of Scripture, let me give you a little history before this. A follower of Jesus named Peter said, Lord, I'm never gonna leave your side. I'm always going to be with you. Then when Jesus was arrested and put on trial, Jesus, at the hardest time of his life, his friend Peter then denies that he even knows him. Okay, so Peter, and then we see that Jesus was crucified, 3 days later brought back from the dead. But Peter is dealing with this feeling of, you know what, I have denied God. At the time that he, as a friend, could have relied on me most, I completely said I did not know him. I don't know that man. He called down curses from heaven. He kind of blew it. But we see that Jesus reinstates Peter. And this is in John 21, verse 15. It says that they had breakfast on the beach together because Peter was out fishing. He went back to fishing. He comes in because he sees it's Jesus, and they eat together. Now in verse 15 of John 21, when they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you truly love me more than these? Yes, Lord, he said, you know that I love you. Jesus said, feed my lambs. Again, Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you truly love me? He answered, Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Jesus said, Take care of my sheep. The third time he had said to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was hurt because Jesus had asked him the third time, do you love me? Now think back, that's how many times that Peter denied Jesus? 3 times. So again, he's asking him 3 times, do you love me? And his feelings are hurt at this point. And he says, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. And then Jesus says, feed my sheep. I tell you the truth, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go. Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then he said to him, Follow me. I'll give you a little history lesson after this. Peter went on to help build the early church as a leader for many years, and finally was himself crucified. So when it says that others will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go, when you're old, you'll stretch out your hands. He was actually crucified. At this point, Peter in his life had fell so in love with Jesus that he asked to be crucified upside down because he didn't feel worthy to be crucified in the same manner as Jesus. It's pretty heavy. So we see that Peter, because of this moment of forgiveness with Jesus, he goes on to this passionate love for God, even to death. And this is this moment that Jesus at this time is saying, I forgive you, but you know what's going to happen is later on in your life, it's going to get rough. It's going to be hard for you, Peter. Now here's this little tiny verse that stuck out to me that I want to look at is right after this situation. Because it's a powerful situation, and we can sometimes miss the little thing right after the powerful moment. Then he said to him, Follow me. Now Peter turns. Now remember those 2 words. Peter turned. And he saw that the disciple whom Jesus loved was following them. He was walking behind. This was the one who had leaned back against Jesus at the supper and had said, Lord, who is going to betray you? It's John. And when Peter saw him, he asked, Lord, what about him? Now that's what I want you to think about for a minute, because Jesus had just said, Peter, follow me. And they're walking because we see that somebody else is following them, which means they're going somewhere. So I imagine that they're going down the beach, and to kind of reinstate what Jesus had just said, he says, follow me. And where Peter gets into trouble is Peter turns. He looks at somebody else, and he sees John. And maybe Peter's feeling nervous, saying, man, Jesus just told me I'm going to have rough times ahead, and this doesn't seem fair, and this seems hard. And he looks at John and he says, what about him? Now, I can relate to this. There's been times where I've faced situations and I've wanted to say, but God, what about all the smiley, happy people? How come you didn't throw them in the hole with me? Have you ever felt that way? I'm just being honest. That's how I've felt before. But look at what I'm going through. And maybe you voice those things. Lord, what about him? And the problem is not what we're going through. The problem is when we turn. When we get our eyes off of following Jesus and we look to criticize somebody else. Lord, what about him? Now think about that for a minute. Lord, what about him? They come to our church, but I know how they really live. Or Lord, what about him? He sits and does nothing. Week after week I do as much as I can for you, God, and that person does nothing. And the problem being, that's not our place, is it? That's God's place. It's God's place to stir our hearts up, to challenge us to serve Him. It's God's place to do these things, and it's not ours. And so I want you to think of American Idol for a minute, and the stage is life. And the judge's table only has one chair. And the judge is Jesus. And He's not evaluating if we're doing a good job or if we're singing on key. We're just serving in this stage called life. We're living out our faith by serving God the best we know how. And the trouble is when we come down off the stage and we sit and we evaluate others. And the trouble in that is we're not doing anything again. And Peter, he was just getting ready to do amazing things for Jesus again. Remember, he had quit? After he denied Jesus, he quit. He went back to fishing. He said, this was a good idea for a while, but it's obviously that I'm not the material cut out for it, so I'm done. Jesus brings him back into it, challenges him, and forgives him, and reinstates him. And the first thing he does is so scared to get on the stage of life, he stops and says, what about him? He's not doing anything. What about that guy? That's not a good place to be, is it? Is it? And why? Is because God has called us to go and to follow Him. And the things that God asks me to do as I follow Him might be a little different than you. So if God challenges my heart with a big step of faith, I can't look at any of you and say, but what about that person, God? I just have to say, Jesus, I need faith to go for this. I need faith to keep going. And to continue on the stage of life, to continue serving, and not ever step down and get in that critic's chair. We love to be the sitting